Gracious Lord, we thank you for your grace and your mercy and your goodness towards us. We thank you for the light that you've been shining on our path. Lord, I know I thank you just that I'm even here as we see so many people fall off the path along the way. I thank you for each and every one of us that were here. It's my prayer that we continue on this path and endure till the end. As we see the events all happening very rapidly, I pray that we be equipped with the full armor of God and a forehead of flint, and that we would stand firm in the truth every step of the way. I thank you for your leading in the reviews that you've been having us do. And I pray that we would be the teachers that you have called us to be, that we would have understanding with the knowledge that you've given us, that we might be wise. We ask you for your Holy Spirit to guide and direct us tonight, that we might be blessed through this review again. We thank you and we praise you, and we ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Are you doing it, or did you?
Yeah, I'll go ahead. Do you want to do it?
It's up to you.
Do you have it up?
I don't.
Okay, yeah, I have it up. I'll go ahead. Okay, this is number 5 of Guadalupe. And when last week we went through Pyrrhus. And so we'll start with a little bit of review, it looks like. My chair, but I got a dog right underneath the wheels. Okay, so in our last study, we talked about Acts 27, which linked us to the history of Pyrrhus through the number 273, partly because of the number 273, also because we are covering the history that relates to the King of the South. We identified that where Acts 27 brought us was to the life of a king called Pyrrhus. And as we've begun to identify, it takes place in 2 parts, an Alpha and Omega. There's the history of Macedonia that we've traced, and that's 317 BC to 285 BC. And now there's a second history. Pyrrhus was not successful when his campaigns were directed into the Greek world of Macedonia and these generals, Alexander's empire. So Pyrrhus is forced to find a new field, and where he chooses to go is into Italy and to war with Rome. And now it's war between the north and the south of Italy, between Rome and Pyrrhus, allied with Tarentum. So it's the north and the south here. In 285 BC, we find Thurii, another city-state that was generally under the sphere of influence of Tarentum, changes its allegiance to that of Rome. And we saw that the Thurii, that they had the Democrats and the aristocrats, and one was, I'm trying to think how to describe it, more about their heritage and their family with Tarentum, and the others were, can't think of the right words to use. Industrious wasn't the word, but they wanted to be about trade and all that, and wanted Rome. And so in the end, they chose to side with Rome when the battle came into here. So in 285, we find Thurii, another city-state that was generally under the sphere of influence of Tarentum, changes its allegiance to that of Rome. You can mark that twice in this history, 285 and then 282 BC. In 282 BC, Rome responds and breaks an agreement it had with Tarentum. Tarentum responds by attacking Thurii, and this leads to war with Rome. So there's a war now between Rome and Tarentum. Tarentum is not strong enough to defeat Rome alone, so they ask King Pyrrhus to fight on their behalf. He sails over in 280 BC from Epirus, and he brings all these city-states into an allegiance. He begins to prepare Tarentum itself for war with Rome. Rome descends on the south later that same year, initiating the first battle before Pyrrhus was ready. They meet at Heraclea, and Pyrrhus is victorious against Rome because of this new weapon, the war elephants, that Rome hadn't seen before. It's winter, so both sides withdraw and prepare to fight again in the spring. So that was the Battle of Heraclea. This battle here, where we see that Rome attacks Pyrrhus, and Pyrrhus is the victor. The following spring, they meet at Asculum. Rome has spent the winter preparing for the elephants by building these carts, the elephant carts, but it was failure for Rome. The elephants just break them apart, and Pyrrhus wins again thanks to his elephants. We also see that Pyrrhus is losing men, and he can't win many more times before his army is so weakened that it can't fight. So he makes a temporary peace with Rome and instead engages on this new plan to build up his strength more gradually, beginning with the island of Sicily, thinking that if he can take Sicily, he can also take Carthage. Carthage is powerful, and if I remember right, Carthage put a dictator in Sicily, if I remember that correctly. So Carthage is powerful. They have the resources and knowledge to build a powerful navy because of the coastal location along the north of Africa. Pyrrhus was going to build an immense navy there and come around to Greece and Macedonia and fight with our familiar faces, particularly the generals Lysimachus and Seleucus, probably face Ptolemy in Egypt, and then come back around and become king of Macedonia and sweep back to take Rome. Pyrrhus has this circular plan. He's still going to take Rome, but more gradually. So that's where our story ended. Pyrrhus sailed down to Sicily, and he quickly freed the island from the control of Carthage. This is where he really went wrong. He wanted to become king of everything. His plans were so big that he needed to rule in a different way. The people of Sicily were not just going to build him an army and navy very willingly. They needed a little bit of force. They called Pyrrhus to their country to free them from dictatorship under Carthage, and they didn't expect him to be another dictator. But when he sailed down to Sicily and freed them, he took control of the island and started to abuse his new power, imprisoning the leadership of the island, killing or imprisoning those who spoke against him, and forcing the people to start building this navy for this plan that he has. And as they start to resist, he exercises more and more force. And very quickly, they realize they have another dictatorship that's worse than Carthage. What Carthage gave them was better than what Pyrrhus was doing. So the population was beginning to wish they had their old dictatorship back. Pyrrhus is also running out of money because he wants to build this massive navy, and it takes money. So he is also having financial trouble. To become king of everything takes a lot of resources, finances and people, and he's struggling with that. So he takes some advice, and he goes into an ancient temple. And there's a goddess in Sicily in this massive temple, and underneath is buried this treasure, all this gold and offerings that have been given to this deity. And facing financial trouble, Pyrrhus desecrates that temple. He raids it and takes all of its wealth, and he puts it on ships. Then he sails these ships back to Tarentum to fund his war effort. But these ships encounter a storm. They're destroyed, and all the wealth that has been placed on them from this temple was spread over the coastline, and this caused Pyrrhus to panic. And in his language, after this time, all the way to his death, was that everything that was failing after was the judgment of this goddess. So everything that was happening was because of this judgment that was on him from the goddess for desecrating her temple. So I wanted to point out something, not about this, but talking about the dictatorship and being worse. I don't know, has anybody else been reading or did get the Mussolini and the Pope, or the Pope and Mussolini, whichever it was called?
Are you asking if somebody got the book?
Yeah, is anybody else got it or listening to it, or?
It's on my list, but I haven't got it yet.
No, that's okay. I was just asking before I said something. I've been listening to it. I actually went to go look it up. I know I might have already said this. I went to go look it up the other day when it was mentioned again, and then it said on Amazon that our records show you already have this. I was like, oh, I totally forgot that I got it. I started listening to it and then forgot. I think when I started to listen to it, it was really kind of complicated for me to follow. But after her presentations that she did, it was way easier. And chapter 2 is talking about Mussolini. You know, it's all talking about his, you know, what kind of character he is and everything. And she mentioned some of the things, but I tell you, in reading, or I was listening to it, but in hearing all these things, it's like, I don't know why people can't get that that's Trump. You know what I mean? It was just like identical. So, does somebody else want to read?
I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
So in this history, after the Battle of Escalon takes place in Sicily, he behaves as a dictator and he desecrates the temple. Huh? The situation gets so bad in Sicily. Did you read this, Jackie? It sounds familiar.
No.
Okay.
I didn't.
The situation gets so bad in Sicily that they write to Carthage and ask Carthage to come and free them from Pyrrhus. So first they ask Pyrrhus to come and free them from Carthage. Then they realized they had a worse dictator under Pyrrhus, so they asked for Carthage back. At the same time, Sicily is asking to return to Carthage. Pyrrhus receives a report that Rome has broken their treaty and is descending on Tarentum. He left his son in Tarentum to watch over the city, and he receives a report that Rome is marching on it. So he is facing a battle with Rome he can't avoid. Seeing his control of Sicily weaken internally, he flees Sicily and returns to Tarentum just in time. Rome is descending and Carthage is attacking. He heads back to southern Italy and faces Rome at one final battle in 275 BC, the Battle of Beneventum.
And Beneventum is Panium, right?
Yeah. This is the last battle between Rome and Pyrrhus. It's a 6-year war with 3 battles between the north and the south, Rome and Pyrrhus. It ends in 275 BC with the last battle. Rome attacks the south, Pyrrhus, and this time it is victory for Rome, and Pyrrhus is defeated. Why is he defeated? Once again, Pyrrhus faced Rome. Rome was on one side, Pyrrhus on the other side, and then the elephants. Behind the elephants, about 20 of them, is his army. The elephants charged at the Roman army. As the elephants charged, something caused them to change direction, and they turned around and charged back over Pyrrhus's own army. So the elephants of Pyrrhus defeated him. But basically, Pyrrhus's elephants defeated Pyrrhus.
Right.
So it's elephants that still decide the victory of that battle. But instead of helping Pyrrhus defeat Rome, they turned and charged over his own troops, and this loses the battle for Pyrrhus. The only real story of how that happened was that there was a younger elephant that was wounded and that its mother was part of this group. When she heard the cries of her wounded baby, she became wild and distracted and turned back to go to the baby elephant. When she turned, she leads all the elephants to turn and go towards Pyrrhus. They went back over Pyrrhus's army. So again, as with Heraclea and Asculum, and now with Beneventum, the victor is decided by the role of elephants. And with the battle at Beneventum, Pyrrhus leaves Italy. He flees immediately and goes back to Epirus, which takes us right back to where we began. 275 BC is the end of the Pyrrhic War. 273 BC, there is a general or king who has been following the reports of these battles between Rome and Pyrrhus because he is intimately connected to one of the players. This general is Ptolemy. He knows Pyrrhus very well. Pyrrhus has spent a lot of time in Egypt. He married Ptolemy's stepdaughter. They have very close and personal connections, and Ptolemy knows what a good general Pyrrhus is. Ptolemy hasn't been paying much attention to the rise of Rome, but over the 6-year battle with Pyrrhus, he watches over Rome's behavior. He saw how Rome swept down and took over the south. He recognizes that there is an important global power developing, and he can no longer ignore its rise.
Interesting. Because they came out of, what it is, I think it says it came out of obscurity, Rome. Is that the word I think is used?
I think at one point, yeah.
Yeah, out of littleness, out of nothingness. There are several ways that I remember hearing it referred to.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
In 273 BC, Ptolemy or Egypt sends ambassadors to Rome, the first offer of a diplomatic relationship. A.T. Jones tells us that the following year, in 272 BC, Rome returned the favor, and Rome sent ambassadors to Egypt, headed by Fabius Maxima Jurgens. His name means the maximum flood. Two other things happened this year. In 275 BC, Pyrrhus is defeated, but he is not killed. In 272 BC, Pyrrhus is down in Greece and fighting a separate campaign in the city. He makes some very poor choices while he is fighting. His son is killed, and he is emotional over it, and he continues to make worse decisions. He ends up in the streets of this city fighting in tight alleyways with his whole army, fighting in hand-to-hand combat with his enemy. He is disconnected. He's made poor decisions by bringing his army and elephants into the middle of the city. It was an effort to take a Greek city that went completely wrong. As he is fighting hand-to-hand with the soldier, he's fighting in this tight street. In a window above, the mother of the soldier who is fighting with Pyrrhus is watching. She leans out of the window and takes roof tiles and hurls them at Pyrrhus, who is on a horse. One of the tiles hits him in the head. It stuns him, and he falls off his horse, and he is killed by the soldier, by the fall and the soldier. 272 BC, Pyrrhus is killed. We already discussed this in Acts 27. What city was he killed in? Argos. Argos is named after the Argolic plain where they grew all their grain. Its name, Argos, is a reference to the color of the grain at harvest time, white.
You know, I don't know what this means, but I'm just kind of thinking about it, because Pyrrhus is the king of the south, and yet you have Egypt, Ptolemy, that sends ambassadors to Rome. So I'm just thinking we have Putin, Russia, that gets a deadly wound, right? And then dies. But Egypt is here. I don't know what it means, but it just goes along with some of the things I keep wondering about. But Egypt is here, and it's Egypt that sends ambassadors to Rome. What does Egypt represent?
Can Egypt represent the world?
Yeah, that's what I think. And then, yeah, because what I've been kind of seeing as we go along, you've got, where is it? It's in it's one of the verses in Isaiah, I think it's in Isaiah 52, that he says, my people went into Egypt. I think it says went into Egypt a fourth time, and the Assyrians oppressed them. I think it says oppressed them without cause, something like that. But because we know there's several places in history where they go to Egypt. And even Jesus went down, Joseph and Mary took him down to Egypt, remember? He called my son out of Egypt. Because we have Babylon, right? And that's going to be the papacy, the counterfeit. And where are, you got God's people, well, the church, much of the Adventist church is conservative, like with the Protestants. But what about the liberals? I don't know. I haven't heard her say anything beyond that. But I know those are just things that I always think about because we're looking at all the parties that are involved, right? And Pyrrhus was the king of the south through this history. But then you have Egypt and Rome. Okay, so there's another story we can link to 272 BC. In 275 BC, Pyrrhus is defeated in Italy. Rome has control over the south, but Tarentum did not surrender so easily, and they hold out under siege. From 275 to 272, Rome is besieging the city of Tarentum, the last city they have to have total control of the south. And in 272 BC, Tarentum surrenders. Tarentum falls and Rome takes the last city in the south. I think it's Daniel 8. Is that where it's at, where it talks about they conquer 3 territories? Anyways, I'll keep on the study. I have a lot of thoughts in my head. I don't know if anybody else gets those thoughts, but what Egypt means here. So we will come back to this concept because Beneventum, we already drew conclusions that Beneventum is a reference to what we call Panium. And 272 BC becomes the symbol of Sunday law. We call these waymarks Panium and Sunday law being shipwreck in the story of Acts 27. We're going to review this history again from a different perspective in another study. But what we can begin to see is that the defeat of the king of the south is a process. Everyone knows who won in 275 BC. Egypt is already recognizing it, but it's still a process. It begins in 275 BC and begins to fall till it's completely destroyed in 272 BC. And we'll discuss what that looks like. In the story of Pyrrhus, we're going to bring in other witnesses to show this process. This is the story of Pyrrhus from 303 BC when he begins to be involved in world politics to 272 BC where he dies. So we have divided his life history into 2 parts. You got Macedonia and then Italy. Macedonia ends a Cold War and it begins a second phase, the Cold War, and it begins a second phase. It's changing in its location. So when we come to the Pyrrhic War history, we're already referencing the battles of Raphia and Panium. And this is just the whole thing, but in order to be able to read it, I didn't put it on one page. So this just picks up here and finishes it out. It takes you all the way back to 317, with Cassander placed a dictator, Demetrius frees Athens, and traces through this history. There's an alliance between Demetrius and Pyrrhus. And then this is the Battle of Ipsus. I'm pretty sure the Battle of Ipsus is the other perspective she's going to discuss in the other one, because that's coming up in the Battle of Ipsus. What we want to begin to consider is what this teaches us in application. Pyrrhus comes in 2 histories, and that's the king of the south. So when we come into our history and we talk about Panium, who is the king of the south? And that's Russia. And who do we bring to mind? There is a king and a kingdom. Russia is the kingdom, Putin is the king. Daniel 2 gives us an important principle, a Bible rule. The rule is about a king and a kingdom. When Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar the meaning of the statue, he points to the head of gold. And what does he say to Nebuchadnezzar? He says that head of gold is you. It's Nebuchadnezzar as an individual. It's not just a kingdom, but it's also a person. We did the same thing with Greece. It's Greece, but who is it? It's Alexander. When you come to the history of a kingdom, you come to a history that's connected to a prominent king, and the symbology is connected. So if this is the history of Putin in Russia, who is the first history speaking of when we come to the Alpha? We're going to trace the kings of Epirus. Pyrrhus was the most prominent king and covers all our history. But the first king marked in that history is Admetus, and Pyrrhus is the 10th. So you have the first Admetus, and the 10th is Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus became king. He faced some internal problems, and he was removed from that leadership. Someone else became king in here. Someone else became king, Neoptolemus. I'm not good at that one. The second, Pyrrhus forced him to co-rule. So there was a time when you had two kings of Epirus, Pyrrhus and Neoptolemus. The second, Pyrrhus and Neoptolemus had him killed, and he returned as a sole king of the kingdom. So if we're going to talk about Pyrrhus and say that he is Vladimir Putin, Putin was president in 2 terms, 2000 to 2008, 2 4-year terms. Under the Russian constitution, he cannot run a 3rd consecutive year, or term, I think it's supposed to say. So Putin pretends to step down, and Medvedev becomes president. But was he ruling alone? Medvedev made Putin his prime minister, and they did not try to hide the fact they were co-ruling. But Medvedev was only president for 1 full year term. And in 2011, he announced he would not be running for re-election. He dutifully stepped aside, and Vladimir Putin could run for a 3rd term because it wasn't consecutive. So this is how Vladimir Putin retained hold of power without breaking the Russian constitution, which says you can only rule 2 consecutive terms, the same as in the laws of America. But he has managed to control that country by using some clever tactics since 1999, which is 20 years. When we discuss Putin, we are saying he is the 10th, and so who was the first? And just to make the point, I think we all know this, that a president in the United States can only be president 2 terms. And in Russia, it's 2 consecutive terms. So he was his 2 consecutive terms, and then had Medvedev come in, but co-ruled with him. And then Medvedev stepped aside, and Putin could rule again. So Stalin then is the first one. Looking at Pyrrhus again, we've already said that he became king at a young age. Why was he king so young? What we find in that history is that their nation had a set of peculiar problems. His father had been king, his cities, but he lost the support of his own people, and he was removed in a political coup. And another king took the throne, a rival, Neoptolemus. And I think there was 2 of them, yeah, because it was the first and then there was the second. And this doesn't last long. Eusebius is returned to the throne and Neoptolemus is removed. I don't know if I'm saying that, but you guys, I get so tongue-tied on these names. But because of this coup, the cities is so weakened that he is killed in this history by Cassander. Cassander does not like the leadership of the city, so he invades Epirus and has him killed. When he is killed, his brother Pyrrhus's uncle takes the throne, and that's Electus the second. He is the oldest brother of the cities. He should have had the throne in the beginning because he is the oldest brother. The reason he is overlooked is because he is very unpopular and is known for his lack of self-control, particularly his temper. The historians call it an unforgivable and ungovernable temper. We brought that down into the history that led us to Putin, who we should remind ourselves when he became president was comparatively young, incredibly inexperienced, unlike any president they had before until the leadership of Stalin. There's a question mark there that maybe this got corrected, but it was something that couldn't be made out. So we find Gorbachev, who was removed in a political coup. Gorbachev removed like Ascites was in a political coup. That placed his rival, somebody can say that one, Yaniev, is that how you say that? Whoops. Takes power, but let's see. Yaniev is leading in this stage what is the Soviet Union. Yaniev takes power, but not for long because Gorbachev was able to come back. He survives the coup and retakes power, but he has been so weakened by what has happened in this history that he cannot hold on to the government. He steps down, and it is the end of the Soviet Union because he was so weakened. So we saw Ascites was taken in by a coup by the rival, and then Ascites killed him, had him killed, right? And then Ascites takes rule again, but then he's weakened. We have the same thing with Gorbachev as well. Rules, he's taken in a coup, his rival runs, and then Gorbachev comes back, and then that's when the USSR was weakened. We're looking at the time of in the time of 1989. So Boris Yeltsin took power, and what was Boris Yeltsin's problem? He had no self-control, in particular with alcohol and the corruptions in his government. His lack of self-control has a side effect with his health as it begins to fail. Because of these issues, he loses the respect of the people and is forced to step down, making way for Putin. So we can see these histories are paralleling. When Gorbachev stepped down, that was the end of the USSR. When you go back to the history leading up to Stalin being here, we go back to the history leading up to Stalin. When Tsar Nicholas was removed, it was the end of a monarchy. Instead of Tsar Nicholas, Lenin takes power. And why didn't Lenin stay in power? He also had health issues and had a series of strokes. So we can parallel the rise of Putin that placed him in power as young and inexperienced with the rise of Pyrrhus, who came in young and inexperienced. We can create this structure, a straight reference from Pyrrhus to Putin. So we have Pyrrhus to Putin here, this straight reference. We can also see it in the line from the rise of Stalin to the rise of Putin on our line. Stalin to Putin. Gorbachev to Yeltsin. Gorbachev to Yeltsin here. And Nicholas is the end of the monarchy. Gorbachev is the end of the USSR. Lenin takes power. He has problems with health, and he places Stalin in his position. Stalin is placed in the position of general secretary, which he holds to his death by Lenin. Vladimir Putin is placed in his position, first as prime minister, and then as president directly by Boris Yeltsin. Boris Yeltsin has a problem with his health due to lack of self-control, particularly in relation to alcohol. So we have created two structures, and we can see that Pyrrhus is Putin here. They are representative of each other, and that explains the history in our Italy line. We can also see that Putin is typified Putin, so Pyrrhus is Putin, and Putin is typified by Stalin. So Pyrrhus equals Putin, and Putin equals Stalin. We can take the history of Pyrrhus as we see it in Italy, and it represents Putin, who is Pyrrhus also going to tell us who is Pyrrhus also going to tell us of? He's going to tell us of Stalin, because this is the Alpha and Omega, the two histories of the King of the South. The King of the South under Stalin and the King of the South under Putin. So when we come to the beginning history, whose history are we to look into? Stalin. And that takes us to the world wars, which Elder Parmenter has been introducing and describing to us. So they should already be familiar terms. We should already be aware of how we are studying them and the conclusions we are coming to about them. So Stalin and Putin both face war with the King of the North. Stalin faces war with the King of the North, and Putin faces war with the King of the North. You have the two histories of Pyrrhus equals the two histories of the King of the South. You have an alpha and omega history, an alpha and omega history, and you have an alpha and omega history for Putin. So Pyrrhus is Putin, and Putin is Stalin. So if A equals B, B equals C, what is A? A equals C. So if I remember right, then it's Pyrrhus is Stalin as well. Is that how that works out? Maybe somebody followed that better. So A is Pyrrhus, B is Putin, Putin and Stalin, right? See?
Yes.
Okay. And Putin equals Stalin. Pyrrhus equals Putin. Putin equals Stalin. So if I remember right, it's Stalin equals Pyrrhus as well. I think that's the way that was said.
Yes, that's the logic.
Yeah, it just didn't say it on there, but that's the way I remember it. That if Pyrrhus is Putin and Putin is Stalin and Stalin is Pyrrhus, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we're looking at the King of the South, the USSR, not from its end history. We want to go back to the very beginning where the King of the South becomes involved with world affairs. 1917 was the Russian Revolution, where Russia turned into a communist power, first under Lenin and then transitioning to under Stalin. This makes me think of that book too. If you guys do get a chance to get it, it is on Audible. So if you have Audible, it's there. And if you're paying the whatever, you get a free book every month. So that's what I did. I just got the book that was one Mussolini and the Pope, because you can just see so many parallels with the threat of communism or socialism, and then how the union, the alliance, the church and state alliance between Mussolini and the Pope, that alliance is what gave rise to fascism. And you can just see in that, reading through that chapter, they're actually throughout the book, the parallels to today, where you have the Democrats and the Republicans, because what are the Republicans saying? They're calling the liberals socialists, right? And afraid of communism. Okay, so let's see, back where I was, 1917, okay. Let's see, 1917 was the Russian Revolution, where Russia turned into a communist power, first under Lenin, and then transitioning to under Stalin. It's engulfed in civil war until around 1922. 5 years later, and then it takes years from 1922 to 1929, 7 years, for Stalin to take over the USSR as a dictatorship. He wasn't the only communist that was influential. You may have heard of Trotsky and other factions vying for power that were really Stalin's first internal enemies. Even though the USSR has transitioned into this communist power from 1917 to 1929, it's distracted by internal issues. First of all, civil war, then Trotsky, and Stalin tries to take over the country. In 1929, it's Stalin's 50th birthday. He begins in a more clear fashion to build a cult of personality. That's wrong too. A cult of personality, and he begins down his last government rival. He puts down his last government rivals. So from 1929, Stalin is in a stronger position to now start pushing his ideology worldwide. We also know 1929 for other events. This was the economic crash that began the Great Depression. And a side effect of that financial crash was that it enabled the rise of Hitler. When the market collapsed inside Germany, life became much more difficult and people became much more desperate for alternatives. And the language of a populist leader like Adolf Hitler became much more appealing to them. And you can trace his election wins from 1929 and see how quickly that escalated. So the conditions led to Hitler as well. The conditions, I'm thinking about Trump and the conditions when you look at what's become of the Republican Party. Across Europe from 1917, particularly escalating from 1917 up to World War II, much of Europe becomes divided into two sides, and countries are deciding which side they're going on or which side they're going to stand on. The division that begins off quietly is between two modes of government, fascism and communism. The countries are deciding on which side they stand. So across Europe, many of the countries are choosing one of these forms of government they want to be. Under fascism, you can mark Italy under Mussolini, and you have Germany as it rises up under Hitler. Under communism, you have the USSR under Stalin, and he's looking at these fascist governments as a threat because he sees these powerful countries are turning fascist, coming into an alliance. He sees that alliance as a threat. He wants to stem that flow by stopping more of Europe from turning fascist. And the next country having an internal struggle of which form of what government it will take was Spain. And there is a Spanish Civil War beginning in the history after 1929 and ends in 1939. That's shown on the lines of the revolutions as well, that 10-year history. And this Spanish Civil War is a struggle between fascism and communism, particularly between the USSR and Germany. They call it a practice match, like you would have in a sport, a practice match before you have the major match. They say that this Spanish Civil War was the practice match before World War II. And it's a proxy war between Germany and USSR, between Hitler and Stalin. And the men you would identify with Spain in this history is General Franco. In 1939, General Franco wins and Spain becomes fascist. So you can see in this history that there is a division between Germany and the USSR already developed. They are natural enemies, and that is obvious from the Spanish Civil War, which ends April 1, 1939. So you have the fascists and you have the communists, you have Mussolini and Hitler, and they both aid Spain and Franco. Then you have communism, Stalin and the USSR, and they send aid to Spanish government. They're going to support the other side. So the world is shocked and amazed when just a few months later in 1939, August 23rd, these two natural enemies enter into an alliance. This is an alliance between these two powers who just fought each other in a proxy war. That's another interesting thing too, because in that history with Mussolini and which were in this history, Mussolini and the Pope were not exactly friends either, but they both needed each other to accomplish their goals. So you have these two natural enemies that come into an alliance. They're natural greatest enemies, and they go into an alliance known as the Molotov-Riven Pact. Why would Hitler want an alliance with the USSR? In the history of World War I, in which Hitler was a soldier, Germany faced a particular problem that the other countries did not have. And it is one of the major reasons why Germany was unsuccessful in those histories. And that issue relates to its location. When a country waged war, it makes sense to send your army to the front line, and the enemy sends their army to the front line, and then your two armies fight. But Germany has a particular problem, and that is its location. When fighting its enemies in World War I against England, France, and the USSR, its main enemies are on the opposite sides of the country, and it had to fight a war on two different fronts. And as that invasion was successful and his army is spread out, and its army got further and further divided until you had two fronts further and further apart, which means you're harming your manpower and resources. For France to fight Germany, all it needed was one front. The USSR, one front, but Germany is so vulnerable because of its central location. And this is the history of World War I, where Germany was defeated partly because of this vulnerable location where France and England fought against them. So Germany had to fight both sides. And Hitler understood that, and that's what leads to his alliance with Stalin. Hitler well knows he's entering into World War II because what he wants is Poland. He wants to take Poland, and he has already been told that if you attack Poland, then you're going to face war with Britain and France. Both of them had assured Poland, Britain and France have both told Poland that if Germany invades you, we will go to war with them. So he'd be fighting on both sides again because Poland's on the other side, right? Yeah. So again, it put Germany in the middle of Britain and France and Poland on the other side. Hitler knows that, and he wants Poland, so he knows he's about to go to war with Britain and France. He's going to face war on the Western Front. And he's just come out of the history of World War I where he fought, and he knows that if he is to start another war on two fronts, there's no hope of victory. He knows that his enemy is on the Eastern Front, just waiting for him to be weak, and Stalin is going to attack him. So he cannot fight war with the West and the East at the same time. That's why they lost in World War I. So what he wants is an assurance from Stalin that when he goes to fight the West, that Stalin will not interfere and attack him at a vulnerable moment. So this is the reason Hitler goes into the alliance with Stalin in 1939. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, it had three parts to it. Part one was non-aggression. Stalin promises Hitler that he will not attack Germany while Hitler is at war with the West. They put a time frame on this. And two was a division of Eastern Europe between themselves. They would be dividing it up into spheres of influence. They said they would take Eastern Europe and divide it between themselves. And third was the trade payment. Hitler was so isolated, he needed to be able to import from the USSR to fund his war effort. If he was also going to bring in shipments from allies from the South or from Asia, he also needed to use the Soviet rail lines. Germany didn't have the resources for World War II. So the Soviet Union ends up funding that war effort, and Germany is supposed to pay for those imports. This is the logic for why Hitler would want an alliance with his natural enemy. He knows he's about to go to war with the West. Why would Stalin want an alliance with Hitler? What did he have to gain for that? What Stalin was able to do was sit back and watch his greatest enemy his enemies destroy each other. So without him having to engage in any effort, he watches Britain and France and Germany begin to destroy and weaken each other. If you have two enemies and they're fighting each other, that gives you the opportunity when they are in their weakest moments to step in and control both. So Stalin wants this war with Western Germany to go on as long as possible. And he is willing to help Hitler if in an effort, both Germany and the West are weakened. And out of that agreement, there is also the division of spheres of influence. While Hitler is horrifying the world, Stalin can more easily sneak in and take control of Eastern Europe countries without repercussion. So these natural enemies begin World War II as allies because of this pact. It was 8 days later, September 1st, when Hitler invaded Poland, and Hitler was taking on three allies. taking on Poland, France, and England versus Hitler, who has an important ally, the King of the South, USSR. And this was the first invasion of World War II. So you have Germany versus Britain, France, and Poland. Germany supported by USSR. From September 1st, they begin to divide Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. It has caused some strain, some problems with their allegiance because they begin to argue over certain countries. Let's see. It wasn't all done with their initial division. Now they have some problems, particularly in the Balkans, Bulgaria, some of those countries, they begin to argue. A breakdown over these two issues, these spheres of influence and trade, which culminates in August 1940. For 1 month, they ceased trade, and this is the work of Stalin. He refuses to send any more supplies to Germany for 2 reasons. There's trouble over dividing Europe. Neither side are happy with their share. And there's issues over trade. Hitler isn't paying for his imports. For a whole month, there is a stalemate until they meet in secret and sort out their differences. They redraw the map of Europe and come to an agreement over trade. And their alliance becomes strong again. But Hitler is afraid. He sees how quickly Stalin can cut off his supplies. And he decides that instead of waiting until the end of the war, he's going to do what he intended all along and attack his ally. He's ready for war on 2 fronts. So it was delayed, but not prevented. So he's going to attack now his ally. In June 1941, somebody else want to read for a little bit?
I can read. Hello?
Yeah.
I can read.
Okay.
Hey, June 22nd, 1941, Hitler invaded the Soviet Union. This was Operation Barbarossa. It's the largest invasion known in history, covering the furthest amount of territory and with the most men. There's never been an invasion known of that has surpassed it. And Stalin was taken completely by surprise. So now Hitler has a war on 2 fronts. This drives Stalin into an alliance. He changes sides. He goes from supporting Hitler into an alliance with the Allies. The same people, the Allies that Stalin helped Hitler fight, he now joins to fight against Hitler. It's repeating the history of 301 BC with Demetrius and Pyrrhus and the 3 allies, where Pyrrhus and Demetrius were fighting. Pyrrhus ends up joining to fight Demetrius in 287 BC. In the history of 1945, by the time we get to the end of that war, you have Germany, Hitler facing an invasion from 2 sides. From the West, you have a new player, but part of that same alliance. The United States of America in an alliance with France and Britain from the West. From the East, you have Stalin, USSR. You see, Germany is divided into East to West, and Hitler was divided. Hitler was defeated. Was either side happy? Was either side happy with just their portion? No. This sparked a war, but not a conventional war, a Cold War. From 1945 to 1989, it doesn't truly end till 1991. The Soviet Union does not end in 1989, but in 1991. Now you have a Cold War. What did the USA use against the Soviet Union? Subterfuge and sanctions. By the end of this Cold War, the USSR lost power. What did they lose? What did Pyrrhus lose? Spheres of influence. He lost everything except the borders of his own country. And the Soviet Union lost everything except the borders of Russia itself. And that's enough to call that a defeat. Defeated in 1991, beginning in 1989. If we parallel these histories, we can mark a period of 10, a proxy war. We recognize the end of the proxy war in Athens and Spain. Then these natural enemies go into an alliance. Demetrius goes into an alliance with Pyrrhus, and we see the introduction of the King of the South. Germany is going into an alliance with the Soviet Union and Stalin because they have a plan. There's a battle coming. There's an invasion coming. Cassander, Lysimachus, and Seleucus against Antigonus and Demetrius. Demetrius is supported by Pyrrhus. This is the history of the Allies against Hitler. Hitler was supported by the Soviet Union. There is a division of Macedonia and a division of Europe. Then we see their relationship strained, Pyrrhus and Demetrius, as a result of the division. Hitler and Stalin relationship strained. They fix their differences, but it is a temporary patch. And it is properly broken when Demetrius invades a Pyrrhus and when Hitler invades the Soviet Union. This drives the King of the South back into an alliance with the Allies who he had originally opposed. And the King of the North is defeated by the invasion on two fronts, which divides his country into East and West. There are two victors. They each take a portion of that territory. And you have a Cold War where they are using sanctions and spheres of influence, the King of the North using sanctions and subterfuge, and the King of the South losing his spheres of influence until he is defeated. At that same point in time, we would have originally said a couple of years ago, the story ends. Daniel 11:40 ends and the King of the South is defeated. We would have originally thought that. Now we know there is a part B. That part B is Pyrrhus in Italy. Because at this same point in time, something else is happening that shows who changes its influence here. There's a sphere of influence that changed their allegiance from Tarentum to Rome, from the King of the South to the King of the North, and this sparks a conflict. In 1989, building to 1991, the country of Ukraine changed its allegiance from the Soviet Union to the West. They do it first in 1989 to 91, but there is a later date, 2014, where they repeat that process. They reject Russia and choose an alliance with the West. And what was Russia's response? Now it is a history with Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, and isn't it now that he's doing a military buildup again?
Yes, in the border of Russia and Ukraine.
Yeah. In 1989 and 2014, both waymarks. And now you got Panium, and he's at Ukraine again.
Yes.
And she says, if you want to understand Panium the Sunday law, look to this history here. So he's on. Building
Subterfuge and sanctions?
That's what led up to the Cold War, right?
Right. Well, subterfuge and sanctions were used during the Cold War, which led to the downfall of the Soviet Union.
Okay.
Yeah, so during the Cold War, it was sanctions and subterfuge. So 89 to 91, sanctions and subterfuge was what brought it down. So
Looking at Panium to Sunday law.
and that was internal.
Right.
There was internal disruption in the Soviet Union.
Right.
So is that what we're to look for, an internal disruption in Russia?
That is what I understand it to be when she says, well, you know, one of the studies that we went through, I think we already went through it. She was actually referring to, if I remember right, with what Russia has been doing to the US on the inside. Do you know what I'm saying? So in 1989 to 1981, but we know it's the King of the South that falls. So, but I remember that she was actually making the point that what the US did, they were not in Russia, but they were using like Radio Free America and that, or whoever, the radio to, somebody say something? To stir the people up, right? And so it fell from the inside. And that's what Russia has been doing in the US to cause conflict between the right and the left until we destroy ourselves. But also, though, we know that Russia, to look at the King of the South, the fall of the King of the South, you look to that history. Because 1989 was the deadly wound and 91 was the death. And Sunday, or Panium, is the deadly wound. And Sunday law is the death.
Yeah. So, well, right now they got their troops along the border.
Ukraine.
Yeah, Ukrainian and Russian border. And I read, and I think that this was in the media broadcast, that if Putin runs again, which he most likely will in 2024, that the United States will not recognize him as the president of the as Russia. And I know there's a lot of civil unrest within Russia right now, particularly what's happening with, I think, I haven't heard, but I think as of 3 days ago, I think, Navalny was still in, well, he's in jail, but, I guess he's in hunger strike.
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah. And he's very weak and sounds like, I don't know how long he's been in hunger strike.
It sounds like quite a while from what I
read. Yeah, but it sounds like he's very, very weak and emaciated. So I mean, whether he'll live or die, that can spark another greater civil unrest within Russia.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of civil unrest right now.
I think I understood it to be that he's taking some very bold steps. I'm thinking real broad terms, not specifics. I think I picked it up from some of the articles that she posted in the media broadcast, I think, but maybe somebody remembers that. But in taking the bold steps is going to be part of what brings him down. Is that correct?
That I do not know.
Okay. That's what I kind of picked up, is that he was taking some very bold steps that he wasn't necessarily equipped to handle. I don't know.
Yeah, well, putting troops on the border, I say, is one of the bold steps.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that could be a miscalculation on his part. All right, continuing on. 2014, Russia attacks Ukraine. And if you go to the list of sanctions placed on Russia, many of them come from this incident, this conflict of Russia attacking Ukraine. So there is an escalation again with the King of the South. Another history where the King of the North and the King of the South begin to quarrel. We can see that happening in Ukraine, first in 1989, then 91. Right where our first history ends, but then it gets repeated. It looks like it's getting repeated now.
Right.
We get to 2014, it begins to get repeated. The history of 280 BC begins to come into our history, and we begin to make present day applications.
280, yeah, right here. Okay. So Russia, Putin attacks Ukraine in 2014. And we see him at 2021 building up on the border there.
Yes. If we were to go into the history of Adventism, we would talk about alphas and omegas, Moses and Christ, Millerites, and the 144,000. And what is one of the conclusions we come to? We say Moses and Christ. And then we say Millerites and the 144,000. How do you know what the end looks like? By the beginning. We don't just learn about our history from the history of Christ. We know about our history because the Alpha tells us about the Omega. The history of the Millerites tells us about the history of the 144,000. So if we are going to understand our history, where do we look? We look to the Millerite history. So when we make our application, we understand the King of the North and the King of the South in this history. We are not just going to take Pyrrhus in Italy. We're not just going to learn from the Omega. We have to take the Alpha. We have to take the history of Stalin and Hitler and World War II and overlay it. In our next study, we're going to take both histories of Alpha and Omega to teach us our own.
That must be it. Yeah. I always like the reviews because it reminds me of how much I forget. I don't know if you're there with me on that, but I always remember how much I forget.
Reviews are always good. You know, repetition. You know, that's forms good habits.
Yeah, it does. So, well, that's, we're 7:30.
So what?
Go ahead.
Yeah. So the earlier, I don't remember what slide it was, but remember we read 5 years. It said 5 years, but it was actually 7 years.
Yeah, I think it was referencing two different things. I think that's what it was, because it was a 7-year stretch between the dates that it said. And let me see if I can find that slide. If I pass it, let me know, but I don't think I've come to it yet. Or maybe I did pass it, do you think? Let's see.
I don't know, but I haven't seen it yet.
Oh, right here.
There it is.
Yeah, so because 1922 to 1929 says it's engulfed in civil war around 1922. I think she's referring to 5 years later after this. 1917 was the Russian Revolution, where Russia turned into a communist power, first under Lenin and then transitioning to under Stalin. It's engulfed in a civil war until around 1922, 5 years later. So it's engulfed in the civil war for 5 years. And then it takes 7 years, this should be a 7, from 1922 to 1929 for Stalin to take over the USSR as a dictatorship.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah. And it doesn't do much good at this point to correct anything in here because these are all going to be, well, I'm never going to probably go back and redo these. We're going to have the other file.
Right. Yeah.
Time I don't have the time to put it all back in the slideshows. And we'll just replace the slideshows on the website with that one big book.
Right.
Yeah, because there was a lot of stuff in here. Like this.
Cult of personality, yes.
Okay. Well, any other comments? We saw, I always remember that part about Pyrrhus being Putin and Putin is Stalin, so therefore Stalin is Pyrrhus, that circular. I remembered that. I just wasn't getting it as I read it down here. So this is the alpha history, and this is the omega history, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And she goes through this a little bit more. I think in this series, she goes through the Putin a little bit more. Okay, well, we're going to look at, on Friday, I'm doing the line of restoration, and I think I'm going to slip another one in there after I do Uganda. Uganda's got to come first, but I'm not going to have Uganda ready for Sabbath. But Friday, we're going to go through the line of restoration. I don't remember who was here when I was talking, if it was just Christine and Francisco or not, but I think it's going to be really helpful to us when it comes to our arguments of thus saith the Lord. And we'll see and walk through that. And we've heard, as I was telling them earlier, we've heard it mentioned along the way where Parminder says that, I'm trying to think, I don't remember the way in which he describes it, but he's talking about Paul, and Paul takes and twists the scriptures to suit himself, is I think kind of the way he refers to it as. But the point that's being made, that I understood a little more clearly. I understood it with Parminder said it, but even more clearly makes it, I find it helpful for us for myself anyways, when we're going to go teach people against the thus saith the Lord, that when Jesus came and the Pharisees said, we have Moses and the law, and to them, their perception was that Jesus contradicted Moses. And so then when you go to Paul does the same thing. When you go into the history of Ellen White, even though you can justify with a thus saith the Lord, the issue of slavery and submission for women, that Ellen White says that slavery is what filled the cup of the United States, and also was teaching that women, we're going to see those two lines, the racism line and the gender line, that that Ellen White was speaking for the women to be a part of the schools and be a part of ministry and all of that. So she's going against a thus saith the Lord. So when we're going back to the church, that's one big thing we need to understand. And how many of us just accepted when we read the Bible that Ellen White says something and it's actually against what was in the back, what was in the past. So as Adventists, they're going to have to come confront that. You know what I'm saying?
Right. I mean, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying because I think we all confronted that. And there was contradictions, between what the Bible says, thus saith the Lord, and what Ellen White says. And I know that we have, well, they're still our friends, but, she rejected SDA because her mother was SDA, but she rejected SDA because she couldn't what do you call it? She couldn't marry what the Bible says and what Ellen White says. So she rejected the Seventh-day Adventism, and we couldn't explain it either. I just knew that somewhere along the line, all this was going to be ironed out. And I'm glad I stuck it out because now it's being ironed out.
Yeah, me too. The big one that I always see is hang on one second. The big one that I always see is Christ. And I was saying that earlier, maybe some of you heard it, but Christ, when he came, there are Christians today, I remember always having some, this being in conversation with my ex-husband about the God of the Old Testament and why some like only Jesus, because he's the God of the New Testament and not the God of the Old Testament. The God of the Old Testament was this mean tyrant that went after all his enemies. And yet, if you look at what Jesus said was, don't you know that when you've seen me, you've seen the Father? That should cause you to pause and think, something's got to be wrong. That if we think they're two different gods and two different, completely different behaviors, but Jesus is saying, when you see me, you've seen the Father, and Jesus isn't behaving like that. So it's a contradiction. So it should cause us, like you said, a contradiction in your mind. And if you hang on, you're going to come to understand it.
Right. And the other part was when, you mentioned earlier about Elder Parmender saying Paul using the scripture to and twisting it to suit his application. And I've always waited. I've always waited for examples when Elder Parmender said those. Would you happen to know what verses specifically?
Off the top of my head, no. He was referring to specific stories, but I can't remember right off the top of my head.
Yeah, I wish I knew specifically what to point. I mean, with Ellen White, yes, we have the slavery and we have the gender. So those I'm pretty clear with. But how Paul twisted the scriptures, I don't know what they are.
I wouldn't remember. I don't remember if anybody remembers where to go back to, because I don't remember where he did that. Seems like it was at a school, for one.
Yeah, but he never gives an example.
We could probably actually message Aaron. He's really good at searching that stuff, and he'll probably know.
I can
ask him if you want.
He mentions that in the Brazil studies too. He says,
Paul,
he had some crazy, he didn't go into detail. But
recent Brazil, you mean? Or older one?
The Brazil that's doing the Sophia.
Okay.
The Wisdom of Sophia. He mentioned that in there, and he also mentioned that Ellen White did the same thing, maybe not to the same degree, but she did the same thing too. So.
Right. Yeah, he mentioned that, but he never gave an example.
No.
I think he does way back when, but I'm putting a note for myself so I don't forget. And I'll send him a message and ask him, because he does a real good job at searching. So we have several examples of that, contradiction. So the contradiction should force us to, to think and to study and try to learn what those why there is a contradiction. What does it mean? And what I understand out of it, when you look at what Jesus said, you know, with them and they're standing on there, thus saith the Lord with Moses, is that Moses is giving them a principle and Jesus is teaching the principle behind what is said. They're taking it literal, and it's and then you go to a spiritual application, but there's a principle behind what is being taught, the principle behind these laws, and they're taking everything literal. That's the way I understood it. So, well, anyways, I don't have anything else unless anybody else does. So would somebody like to close in prayer? Donna, would you like to close in prayer?
Sure. Thank you, Lord, for this wonderful time of reflection, of review. It's so necessary. We have so much that we have to learn and unlearn and retain. And so we do need your Holy Spirit, Lord, to help us with all this and keep everything organized in our minds and orderly. And that helps. And we just thank you for the fellowship and for everyone here and for everyone who does the work, the very diligent work that is so necessary. We pray that you would bless everyone and help us to be able to influence others in the way of truth. We thank you, we give you praise. In Jesus' precious name, amen.
Amen. Keep it in prayer. I don't know if some of you didn't hear it, but I know I was talking to Christine earlier, but for those of you that know or have ever heard me talk about my ex-husband, he's an alcoholic, and we hadn't heard from him for a very, very long time, literally 5 minutes before 6. I had a phone call come in that didn't have a name, you know, so I didn't answer it. And but he left a message and it was him, and he actually sounded sober. So I've been praying that he would get sober and call us. So I think my son is trying to call him now. So I'd like to see him be able to get sober and not go through, I don't think I finished that part with Christine, not go through this. You know, he's spent so much of his life, and I just like to see him out of that condition and able to understand some things if it's at all possible. Well, anyways, we will be here Friday night and look at the line of restoration.
Okay, thank you.